Then let's remind you where we're at, folks. We are moving into, well, not moving into, we are currently in the valuation section. And I'm not going to lie to you. I kind of said this last week, and I've of course said this about several different sections, but I really mean it about this one. This section kind of sucks. And you'll see why here in just a little bit, because there is such unique things to the valuation process and what appraisers do, and it's way outside the scope of what anything a real estate broker would ever really need to comprehend, but for whatever reason, it's part of the curriculum. So we've already discussed what an appraisal is. That is an opinion of value as given by a licensed appraiser. And then we as real estate brokers, we are not allowed to do appraisals. We do something different called a CMA, which stands for Comparative Market Analysis, or in other words, referred to as a BPO, which stands for Broker Price Opinion. And in North Carolina, I told you, they're really the same legal definition. The only differentiation is typically the context of when we use the terms. So we'll typically call it a CMA when we do it for our clients, and we'll typically call it a BPO when we're doing it for a third party for a fee. Pop quiz, who can't do a BPO for a fee in North Kakalaki? There you go. PB. Nailed it. So where we left off, folks, and what we're going to dive back into is these three main approaches to value. And I told you, these are different ways that an appraiser would potentially value a piece of property. And the one they're going to use, or should I say the one that they're going to deem to be the most appropriate, is going to depend on the type of property. And so I told you the sales comparison approach most commonly used in residential, the cost approach most commonly utilized for insurance purposes, and unique properties that don't necessarily have a lot of sales for comparison. And then the last one, the income capitalization approach, deals with how much money it makes. It is valuing something based on its income, not based on its other features or attributes. So let me kind of start with the sales comparison approach, because while this is an approach used in real estate appraisals, we actually use the exact same approach for residential real estate in our CMA. Understand that even though we can't call it a CMA, we can't call it an appraisal, our CMAs are done like an appraisal. That's kind of the way it works. We have to do it the same. We just can't call it the same. And so here's let me kind of help you understand the CMA, or the sales comparison approach, folks. I'll give you two examples. First, let me ask you a question. How tall do you folks think I am?
Six foot.
Jack, you're ruthless. There's always some smart butt that's like, throw something out there like that. Folks, here's the point I'm trying to make. You probably, you're just making a wild guess because you've only ever seen me sitting at a computer desk, all of you, you could make a guess, but it is just a guess. Now, let me, yeah, there you go. I'm like 3 foot tall. This is actually a booster seat that I'm sitting on, right? I'm like Mini-Me from from Austin Powers. Now, here's the thing. None of you know how tall I am, but if I was to stand up and my head was just over the edge of this picture, and I told you that that picture was sitting at 5 foot 9 inches from the ground, and I was just a touch taller than it, what would you guess now? Yeah, I'd say 5'10" would be a pretty good guess. And so the same happens with real estate, folks. You would be thinking, or you'd be completely shot in the dark. Let's do the exact same scenario. If I asked you what a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's 1,700 square foot would sell for in downtown Atlanta, what are you going to tell me? Right. It depends And I mean, you could once again guess, but it'd just be a guess. Now, if I told you that a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that was 1,600 square feet in Atlanta just sold for 700,000 just down the street, you could now use that information. It's like, oh, that one was smaller than the one we're talking about. And we can make educated guesses. Folks, that's what the sales comparison approach is. We use data we know to make educated guesses about a subject property. Does that make sense, everybody? So what we're doing is we take a look at things that have sold. We can look at the details. We know how many square feet. We know how many bedrooms. We know how many bathrooms. We know when it closed. We know all this information. And so we can look at this sale and we would compare it to our subject property and make adjustments to say, okay, well, we know what this one sold for. What would it probably have sold for if it had been identical to our subject property? So we make adjustments. Bill says, what programs are used for comparisons? Us. We use the MLS and we pull the data from there and we make the adjustments based on expertise and past knowledge and, things of that nature. And I'll kind of give you an example. Now, truth to be told, real world CMAs versus textbook CMAs, vastly different, but you just need to know the textbook version for now. Because obviously we're just focused on your test. We'll teach you actual CMA stuff later. Still got that tickle in my throat. So think about it this way. We are making adjustments. And so, things are either superior features or inferior features compared to our subject property. And that's what you've got to understand. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to reiterate this. We only use sold properties. Looking at what something's listed for is not helpful because it may never sell for that. Knowing that something's under contract is also not helpful because we don't know what it's under contract for until it actually closes. It's not uncommon for some houses to be under contract for $30,000 over asking, $40,000 less than asking. Who knows? So we want to pick sold properties that are similar to our subject property, as similar as possible, meaning we want the fewest adjustments possible. I'm going to give you some more examples of that in just a second. Now, I keep saying adjustments. And so this kind of goes back to some of those principles we discussed of like contribution and substitution. What we're really looking at is, well, what does this feature add to it and or take away by having or not having this feature? And we only ever make adjustments to the comparables. We never make adjustments to the subject property. And so I told you this is based on superior versus inferior. Now, this is an extreme oversimplification, folks. So let's walk through this together. If I said, which is better, extreme oversimplification, which is better, a 4-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house? There you go. It's such an oversimplification because, yet again, you could argue depends, but at the end of the day, 3 bathrooms is better than 2 bathrooms. 4 bedrooms is better than 3 bedrooms. 1,800 square feet is better than 1,600 square feet. An acre is better than half an acre. So we're really looking at it from that simplified point of view of superior versus inferior. So let me kind of show you what I mean here. If I know that a property that was 3-bed, 2-bath, sold for $250,000. And then I have a subject property that I'm looking at, and my subject property is a 3-bed, 3-bath. You're looking at this comparable and you're asking yourself, is it better or worse, superior or inferior compared to our subject property? So in this instance, you've got your subject property, you've got your comparable. It is inferior by 1 bathroom. It's not as good. And so what we're answering when we do these sales comparison approaches, well, we know what this comparable sold for. But what we're trying to guess is, what do we think it would have sold for if it had been identical to our subject property? So we make adjustments to bring it to the same level. So we will speculate on what we think having an extra bath would contribute to this comparable. And so we would make an adjustment and say, okay, well, if it had an extra bathroom, it probably would have sold for an extra $4,000. And we use that data to say, okay, well, this comparable adjusted would be about $254,000 if it had been identical to our subject property. And that's really it. We are making adjustments based on these features. And I told you, we really want to pick the comparable that has the fewest adjustments overall. And so, same square footage, same bedroom, same bathroom, similar location. We want all that. And of course, we're not always going to find the most perfect one. And so you have to make some adjustments. We also have to consider things like the date of sale. Folks, the real estate market changes quite frequently. So you never really want to pull anything older than 6 months as a generalization without accounting for inflation or appreciation, things like that. So the more recent, the better. Don't want to go outside of 6 months. You also want to make sure that you compare like-kind properties. You cannot use a townhouse as a comparable for a single-family detached. You can't use a manufactured as a comparable for a modular, so on and so forth. Even on top of that, you want similar amenities also. So if you've got a single family detached in a neighborhood with no HOA, no amenities, it's not going to be a good comp for an HOA community with 6 pools and a golf course. They're just different things. And so as similar as possible. The other thing that you want to make sure is the terms of sale are not unique. It's what we call an arm's length transaction is what we want. Meaning there is nothing squirrely about the transaction. It was sold to a family member. It was an auction. It was a short sale. Those are obviously not going to be good comps either. And then, of course, minimum, we have to select 3 comps. Okay, that is very testable. You got to have at least 3, no more than 5. 6 is too many. So 3 to 5 comps is what we're looking at. And I said we want to make the fewest adjustments possible. Now, one of the things you might be questioning, well, how do we know how much a bedroom is worth or how much a bathroom is worth or how much, any of these things? And there is no statewide standard. There is no citywide standard. It comes through a lot of different things. And this is yet again, textbook version. You have to have this basic understanding for the test. Is it this simple in the real world? Not so much. So let me show you what this would look like to determine the value of a bedroom. If you were to look at 2 different comparable properties, 2 different comparable properties. And we're looking at 2 comparable properties that sold in a given market. And let's just say that no matter how many features it had, all the features were the exact same except for one. So in this example, you got a 3-bedroom that sold for $250, and you got a 4-bedroom that sold for $254,500 in the same market. And if we look at it and every single other feature is identical, what this data tells us is that in this market, a bedroom is probably worth about $4,500. Or in other words, it contributes $4,500 worth of value having one versus not having one. The reason why this isn't a perfect science in the real world, folks, I've seen the 3-bedroom house sell for more. Why? Because it was prettier. But from a textbook point of view, this is how it works. We just kind of look at the difference between 2 almost identical comparables, one lacking a certain feature, and kind of look and see what that added or took away by not having it. Everybody still kind of tracking with me here on how we're looking at these, the values of these different features. So let me show you what an actual comparable is going to look like, or an actual CMA, should I say. It's going to look like. We've got a subject property, which is the property we're trying to figure out by the way, folks, I'm going to say value because we're talking about an appraiser, but we do this the exact same way. We just, we ultimately will call it a probable sales price or a probable lease price. Even though we may say, value along the way, we can't say what the house is worth. So there's that clarification again. But if we have a subject property that we're trying to determine a value of as an appraiser or probable sales price as a broker, that's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it's a 2-car ranch style home, we're going to find multiple comparables as similar as possible in similar markets, recent sales, at least 3, no more than 6 months in the past. And so let's say that we take a look at comp number 1. And comp number 1 is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car ranch style home, and we know it sold for $120,000. So here's the question. Is comp 1 superior or inferior compared to our subject property? There you go. It would be inferior by 1 bedroom because our subject property is 3. Our comparable is only a 2 bedroom. All the other features are the same. And so the question we're answering is, what would this comparable have probably sold for if it had been identical to our subject property? And so when it's inferior, you've got to adjust and add value to the comparable. If it's superior, you subtract, right? Think of it this way: superior, subtract, inferior, increase, right? You can kind of see how those kind of sound similar. And so we're going to add some value here because what we're answering is, okay, what do we think it would have sold for if it had had that 3rd bedroom? Well, in this example, I've given you the value of the bedroom. So how much are we going to add? There you go. $4,500. And so the adjusted value now is for comp 1. If it had been identical to our subject property, it probably would have sold for $124,500. Look at comp 2. 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 2 car ranch style home sold for $121,000. Is this superior or inferior? Yeah, yet again, inferior, because it has only 1 bathroom versus and by the way, don't get confused. You're not comparing it to comp 1. You're always comparing it to the subject property. So typically you would have the subject properties details over here, and you knew that you're always comparing it to these line items, not the other comparables. So it's inferior by 1 bathroom. Bathroom's worth $4,000. So we are going to add $4,000. And so what we're saying is, if it had been identical to our subject property, it probably would have sold for about $125,000. Then we got comp 3. 3 bedroom, 3 bath, 2 car, ranch style home sold for $130,000. Now, is this superior or inferior compared to our subject property? Yeah, some of you already knew where this question was going. This is superior. So now it's better than our subject property. So we need to subtract some value. If it had only had 2 bathrooms versus the 3 that it had, what would it probably have sold for? So we need to subtract $4,000, and it probably would have sold for about $126,000. Now, if an appraiser was doing this, they will do what's called a reconciliation. We're going to talk more about that in a second. They will typically use another method of the valuations as well, like the cost approach, and they will give this a weighted average compared to another method. And so they arrive at a conclusion of 1 number. An appraisal always has 1 value that they have determined it's worth. When we are doing this as real estate brokers, because we're not appraisers, we give it to our clients as a range. So if this was our CMA, we'd say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we could probably sell your house between $124,500 and $126,000. We don't ever give them 1 number. As a real estate broker, we give them a range of numbers, lowest to highest. Is this making sense so far? So let's take it 1 step further, folks, because obviously we're just looking at 1 feature in that example, but it's really no different if we were looking at multiple features that were different. So here you've got a subject property off to the left, 4 bedroom, 2 bath, a garage. Comp 1, 4 bedroom. So that's the same as the subject, no adjustments needed. 3 bath versus the 2 bath. Superior, subtract $3,000. Garage versus no garage. Inferior, add $5,000. And so you're making adjustments for each feature, not the overall comparable. Same thing with comparable 2. Now comparing comparable 2 with the subject property. So 3 bedrooms is inferior to 4. So add $1,500. And once again, we gave you the values up here. 1 bath is inferior to 2. So add the $3,000, and there's your adjusted for comp 2. Then same thing with comp 3. 3 is inferior compared to the 4. Add $1,500. 2 and 2. Don't need to do anything. And then no garage versus having a garage, inferior, add. So you would just make the adjustments, right? 128.5 minus 3,000 plus 5,000. Same thing here, same thing here. And yet again, we as real estate brokers would give this as a range low end to high end, 127.3 to 131.4. And you will have at least one of these questions on the test where they gave you the details on the comparables and you need to make the adjustments to figure out what your range is for CMA. But it will be like one adjustment. So you just got to make sure you keep that superior versus inferior thing straight there. And it's not too bad. What you got, Raphael?
I thought that you subtract. No? Like if you have like a 3 bedroom compared to the 4, you subtract 1,500.
No. Because you got to think we're looking at the comparable. And so if we're talking about this subject property versus comp 3, we know that comp 3 sold for 124.9. And so the question you're answering when you make these adjustments is, well, as it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with no garage, we know it sold for this. What would it probably have sold for if it had been identical to our subject property? So you've got to add value because what you're doing is you're pretending that what you think it would have sold for if it had 4 bedrooms.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But why are you pretending to compare it to the?
Because we're trying to come up with a probable sales price or a probable value of this one. So we're using this data to make an educated guess on what this one could sell for.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So that's why we make these adjustments, right? We're trying to use educated data and educated guesses to say, okay, well, we know what it sold for as it was, but what do we think it would have sold for if it had been identical to our subject property? And that's the adjustment side of this.
It just threw me off because I didn't see like I didn't think that the subject was the one that we're comparing to. I thought it was the 1, 2, and 3 they were being compared to each other.
Nope. This one's being compared to the subject property. This one's being compared to the subject property. This one's being compared to the subject property.
Got it.
Yep. What you got, Ashley?
So going off of that, just I guess to clarify, so we're saying that like the subject is like inferior or superior to like comp 1.
No, we're saying comp 1 is superior or inferior to the subject. You're always comparing it to the subject. So right here, same, no adjustments needed. Here, this is superior to the subject because 3 is better than 2, so you're going to subtract value. This is inferior because it's not as good by not having a garage, so you're going to add value. So every single feature, you're comparing the comparables features to the subject properties. Yep. What you got, Raphael?
So in reality, you just need one to compare and to find out the value, right?
So no. So I think that's where you're getting lost. In this example, just a few moments ago, I was merely showing you how you could determine what a bedroom was worth in the real world in a market. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. We're comparing one comp with another comp to determine the value of a feature, like knowing that a bedroom in this market is worth about this. But that's not the CMA. That's just how you would potentially find the value of a feature. The CMA is where you take 3 comparables that you've found in the MLS that you have realized are very, very similar to our subject property, and now you're making adjustments. But for the sake of pre-licensing, we've just given you the values. That's not going to happen in the real world. The way that you find those values in the real world is the example that I showed you where you look at 2 comps side by side.
Oh, okay. So on the test, you would have the
values given.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry?
We're going to give you the values on the test.
Oh, okay. So you don't even have to compare anything.
No, you're not going to be finding like the value of a bedroom or anything like that in a pre-licensing exam. I'm going to tell you what a bedroom is worth, what a bathroom is worth, things of that nature. And then you're going to make adjustments like we just did here.
Awesome.
Yep. Mm-hmm.